How could the Arkham Knight be the worst Batman villain ever, let alone the worst Arkham villain ever? He has a whole game named after him and was hyped up to be some crazy strong villain that knew everything about Batman and even helped abduct Barbara and almost killed her. This statement cannot be true. Well, yes, all that is true until we take a look at how the Arkham Knight was built up as a character and how horribly his character was executed and squandered when his big reveal was about to happen, and was heavily let down because everyone already knew it was Jason Todd the whole time. Now, I can't really make these claims without evidence or going deeper into them, so in this video, we're going to be doing a deep dive on the Arkham Knight as a character and proving the statement why the Arkham Knight is the worst Batman Arkham villain ever, because there are truly worser villains in Batman as a whole. But now with the intro out of the way, let's get started, shall we? First off, let's go over the most obvious thing, which is the predictability of who the Arkham Knight was throughout the game. Well, you don't actually get a hint of who he is until Jason is referenced at Panessa Studios when Batman starts seeing visions of him being tortured by Joker in Arkham Asylum. But to be honest, I think these visions in particular would have flown if he had seen these visions of every Bat family member. As in the game, we see Barbara getting shot by Joker, which is a little reference to Killing Joke and why she is now paralyzed in a wheelchair. But these visions happen one after another within the same exact section, which basically gives away the entire secret of who he is without keeping the audience guessing. The player in this situation is one step ahead of the character they're playing as, which in my opinion should never be the case. As in this instance, the secret was essentially ruined because us, the player, are already ahead of Batman for quite a while because he doesn't even know who the Arkham Knight is until he comes face to face with him near the end of the game, and the player essentially knows who he is about an hour before you get to the final fight with him. It also really ruins his character in general because throughout the entire game he was hyped up to be this big bad along with the Scarecrow who knew everything about Bruce Wayne and had Batman's number every single time on everything he did, but basically ruined his character by outright telling us who he is without having it be a mystery at all and keeping us guessing. I really think Rocksteady could have paced his character much better instead of throwing everything at us in one go, which would have went a lot smoother than what we got in this game. Like, imagine getting cutscenes of Nightwing, Tim, and every other member from the Bat family and trying to guess who it is. Maybe you could have been Jim Gordon for all we knew. Who knows? But now that we've gotten the most obvious issue out of the way with this character, let's go over the second most prolific problem with the Arkham Knight, which is how he compares to some of the other main villains within the Arkhamverse, such as Scarecrow, who is the main villain of Arkham Knight, Joker from both Asylum and City, and Rael Ghul from City as well, who is technically one of the main villains since he was the mastermind behind Protocol 10 and Hugo Strange in general. And just for clarification, I will not be taking Arkham Origins into consideration as that game was made by a completely different company and not Rocksteady, and it still is the Joker, so it really doesn't make a difference. But first, let's talk about Scarecrow since he already shares a game with the Arkham Knight being the main villain. In my opinion, Scarecrow was definitely more menacing in this game than when he first appeared in Asylum, as he took on a new look and had a much more riskier plan here compared to that game. He was also the only villain in the Arkhamverse to have Gotham be fully evacuated because of the danger he ensued. I don't think the Knight overtakes Scarecrow in this game, mainly because the Knight is not as threatening as Scarecrow in this game, and you essentially know who the Knight is for the entire game, so that makes him even less threatening, to be honest. This point in particular will be brought up multiple times in this video, just as a heads up, because this point is one of the main reasons as to why the Knight isn't as good as he could have been, so don't get annoyed if I keep bringing it up. But as a last point to Scarecrow, he literally was able to successfully capture Jim Gordon and Tim Drake on his accord and make Batman reveal his identity to the world just by exposing him to his fear gas, which honestly was one of the best character developments in this entire series as a whole, especially for a villain in the series that went from a completely irrelevant side character with a cool section in the first game to the main attraction in the final one, which is why Arkham Knight doesn't top Scarecrow in the better villain department. But next up is Rael Ghul from Arkham City, and his character was a little weird as he had two appearances throughout the game, the first being him almost at his deathbed wanting Batman to kill him so he could replace him as the Demon's Head, and the next being the one pulling the strings of Arkham City the entire time. I honestly think Ra's reveal at the end of the game was way more impactful than Jason's in Arkham Knight because you legitimately did not see it coming. It was probably one of the better twists in the Arkham games, and next to Clayface pretending to be Joker, as we all knew that Hugo Strange couldn't have pulled off Arkham City on his own, especially as a single psychiatric doctor and the help of Quincy Sharp. He definitely needed help from someone at a higher power, but it being Ra's Ghul in the end is so unexpected as when you fight him, all we know is that we need his blood to make a cure in order to survive, and that's it. After that, we don't see him ever again until the very end when it turns out that Ra's actually helped Strange put together Arkham City and also weirdly promised him to be the Demon's Head if it succeeded, which it didn't, leaving Strange to be killed in the process. But in my opinion, I do think Ra's was a really good villain in Arkham City, especially because he had an amazing boss fight and his reveal at the end was so unexpected. I know many of you might disagree with me, but Ra's al Ghul is definitely a better villain in the Arkham games than the Arkham Knight in his own game. And finally, we leave the best for last, which is the Joker, who is essentially the main antagonist of all the Arkham games, even Arkham Knight, since he's literally trying to take hold of Batman's mind throughout the entire game whenever he's most vulnerable, and And even though we might not see it throughout the whole game, Batman is technically fighting him every second within this game within his mind. First off, let's talk about Arkham Asylum, which is one of the only times we see him at his full strength, since he's essentially dead in both City and Night and just starting up in Origin, so we don't actually see him at his fullest in that game. But in Asylum is where we see Joker at his peak and see him as actually one of the best villains in the series because of how well he was built up throughout the story and how he was a part of the entire game as a whole. The final boss fight is also really unexpected, as we know throughout the game he was collecting the Titan, but we didn't know what it was actually for. And once he took it all and took all the Titan himself is where the craziest boss fight in the entire series begins, and is one of the best boss fights in the game in general. And I know we're comparing him to the limited amount of characters in that game, so it's not as fair, but even in City, Joker himself didn't even have a boss fight and yet still had more impact in that game than the Arkham Knight did with multiple boss fights and all. In my opinion, I just think Joker melded with the story so well and was told in such a good way that whatever his plan was in any of these games would have played out perfectly because of how well he was implemented within the story. And that will always be the Arkham Knight's biggest flaw. His character wasn't implemented within the story in a good way whatsoever. It's as if Under the Red Hood was just being forced down our throats within one game without any real build up to the reveal. And his character didn't even initiate that big of a threat compared to the Joker. As we all know, Joker is Batman's big bad in his universe and he can do anything. But once we realize it's Jason Todd as the Arkham Knight, we figure out it's just a retelling of the Under the Red Hood story, and all that threat and build up to his character just gets shot out the window. Now, if the Arkham Knight turned out to be Deathstroke, for example, we know he's someone that Batman's barely beaten in the comics in hand-to-hand combat, and we also know that he's a really big threat for Batman. And if he somehow figured out what Batman's identity was, it would have set up for a really good endgame and would have been a really cool reveal, and it could have ended up to what Bane did in Arkham Origins in almost killing Alfred. This was just an example I'm giving in the form of Deathstroke. I'm not saying he'd be an amazing replacement for Jason as the Arkham Knight, but I'm just saying that the reveal and build-up would all be there if he were to be revealed as the Arkham Knight in the end. But I think Jason would have still worked if the character was written and was molded better for the story, as someone like the Joker does, because it doesn't really matter how many times he's been put into these games, and it doesn't matter how many times people complain about him being overused. His character is always on point and always fits in the story. But let me know in the comments what you guys think about that. And finally, let's talk about something we just brought up a few seconds ago, and that's Rocksteady's recreation of Under the Red Hood in Arkham Knight. Now, personally, I really liked how they recreated the Under the Red Hood storyline in this universe, especially if you read the comics that are linked with the Arkham games. It's a lot more gruesome and a lot more cruel compared to the original storyline, which I liked, and the fact you can really see where Jason came from and what he went through when being tortured at Arkham Asylum. The cutscenes in the game don't really do the scenes from the comics justice, but this is something I really loved about the game, and why it's really disappointing to see the character be done so badly is the fact that when these scenes come up in Panessa Studios, you can see in real time the things that Jason went through at the asylum and how much he suffered at the hands of the Joker and the other inmates that put him through the ringer. And although it doesn't show everything in cruel detail of what was done to him, the feel from the comics and the horror from what he experienced were all put into these scenes. But it's just the fact that Rocksteady failed to pace the character well and failed at building his character within this game, and really just let everyone down by messing up a character that could have been a really great addition to the Batman Rogues Gallery, as the idea of the Arkham Knight is really good on paper, but the execution is what failed it in the end and what makes the Arkham Knight, in my opinion, the worst Batman Arkham villain. And that's all I have to say about that. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. I hope you all enjoyed this video and found my takes at least interesting, and if you disagreed with any of my points, let me know in the comments below what you guys thought and if you agreed or disagreed with me. I really like making these kinds of videos because it just ignites a discussion within the community, and I can see what you guys think based on what I say throughout the video. Click on the bat symbol to check out last week's video, which was my Arkham Knight DLC deep dive, as we go over why the Arkham episodes weren't as good as they could have been. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you all next week with another video. Peace!